So here's a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today. First of all, why your conversations don't work now, for those of you who are running into trouble. The second thing we're going to look at is what can you do better? What's the smart politics approach? And specifically, we're going to be talking about the change conversation pyramid and the change conversation cycle. And then after that, we're going to do a demonstration where I'm going to talk hopefully with one of you from the audience who is going to channel someone you know who is on the right end of the political spectrum, someone who you find difficult to talk with. And I'll do my best to show you what the smart politics approach is to talking with that person. And then finally, we'll just kind of open the floor up for question and answer. So let's talk about the 5 big reasons why your conversations aren't working right now if you're having them. And the first reason is really that you think people who disagree with you are bad. And this is really common to think that the people who on the right, Republicans, however you want to classify them, are either evil or stupid or ignorant. But when it comes down to it, we're not really divided by nature. We're not divided by our character. It's not that people on the right are more evil or are more stupid or are more ignorant than we are. The big difference is they were born in Republican households and we were mostly born in Democratic households. People are generally assigned their political party at birth the same way they are assigned their religion, and they do not stray from that initial designation with any more frequency than people stray from the religion they were born with. So if you wonder why people stay in that lane or why someone is a Republican, most likely explanation is that their parents were Republicans. But there are a number of other factors that are heavily predictive about what political party people will join or will grow up into, and really what they will inherit. And that is related to their religion, where they're from. If people grow up in an urban area, they're much more likely to be a Democrat. If they grow up in a rural area, they're much more likely to be a Republican. Race and ethnicity are heavily correlated. Sex, gender, and sexuality are heavily correlated. And of course, socioeconomic status. People who go to college are much more likely to end up Democrats than people who don't go. So when you have that feeling to think that person you're talking with is a bad person because of their beliefs, remember that they probably inherited those beliefs and their perspectives from their environment. It's not coming from who they are as a person. Second mistake that people make is telling other people what to think. And we don't always think we're doing this, but a lot of times that's exactly what we're doing. And let's face it, nobody likes to be told what to think or what to do. In fact, human beings all are wired with something we psychologists call reactance. Reactance is an innate psychological dislike of feeling controlled. When someone comes at us and tells us to do something, even if it's in our best interests, we naturally resist because we want to be autonomous. We want to be agents of our own lives. And so often, if you go into a conversation telling somebody what the right way to think is or the right thing to do is, it actually pushes them in the opposite direction. So it's really important to leave it open for them, give them the feeling of choice, just like you would with a 2-year-old when they don't want to eat their vegetables. Number 3, a lot of times what people do is make others feel bad about themselves. And again, this is one of those things that can be done kind of subtly. You may not actually be coming out and saying, well, you're a bad person if you voted for Donald Trump, or you're a racist if you voted for Donald Trump. But people often can get the message really loud and clear, even if you don't say that explicitly. And the problem with this approach is that this is another thing that pushes people away from us rather than pulling them toward us, which is what we really want to do.
You might, Karin, you might want to hit the mute all on participants. We're getting a little feedback, I think.
Where would that be?
Oh, it's in there somewhere.
Oh, I see it. Okay.
And then folks, if you need to speak, you can unmute yourself, no problem.
All right. So some of you might be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And basically what this shows is that all people, in addition to, needing food and water and shelter and needing a place to live, also need self-esteem and love and belonging. And when we take those away from people, when we threaten those things, they're going to look somewhere else for them. So when we tell someone that they're a bad person because they voted for Donald Trump, we are threatening their sense of well-being. And they have to fight back against that, because that sense of well-being is absolutely essential. And these little arrows I have on the sides are actually there because we've discovered through research that Maslow's hierarchy of needs is probably a little backwards, in that he put safety needs and physiological needs at the bottom. But one of the things we're beginning to realize is that self-esteem and love and belonging probably belong at the bottom, with physiological and safety needs above those. In other words, people would rather die than be shamed or embarrassed by other people, or to be kicked out of a group that they belong to. So they will go to tremendous lengths in order to maintain face or to maintain their connections to their current groups. When we threaten those groups, we can actually drive them to membership that is more extreme, and it doesn't pull them along toward us. Part of the reason for this is that when people feel bad about themselves, they get defensive. They go into fight, flight, or freeze. When they're in that mode, they go into cognitive shutdown. And when people are in cognitive shutdown, they can't think, they can't learn, and they can't empathize. And so they're not able to take in any kind of new information we want them to take in about politics. The fourth mistake that people often make, really often, is in political dialogue, is arguing or debating with reason and evidence. And we often feel like we are in a courtroom and we are presenting a case. And if the person we're presenting this case to were just rational and reasonable, that they would obviously see they were right, that we're right, and they would change their point of view. The problem is, talking with someone who has pre-existing beliefs about politics isn't like arguing in a courtroom. Because remember, in a courtroom, you're presenting reason and evidence to a jury with no prior opinions. They have been selected precisely because they know nothing about the subject at hand, and will not be biased. When you're having a conversation with someone about politics, you're almost always talking with someone who has strong prior opinions. And therefore, it's a lot more as if you were the prosecuting attorney talking to the defense attorney and trying to convince the defense attorney that they should just give up and admit that their client is guilty. And that's not going to happen. So why does this happen? Basically, our minds have a belief defense system, which is a built-in bias against foreign ideas. It's kind of like an immune system for the mind. And it's characterized by motivated cognition, which means we look for reasons that support our side and automatically discount reasons that support the other side. And it's also characterized by social cognition, which means we heavily trust people who are like us and distrust people who are unlike us and who are not a member of our group. And all of those factors together make it really hard to get someone to consider new ideas. They're just too dangerous. And the fifth reason we run into trouble in political conversations is that our emotions get in the way. We all get triggered. Being triggered is a difficult state to be in because when we're triggered, we're less persuasive. We go into cognitive shutdown. When we're in cognitive shutdown, we can't be strategic and we can't communicate clearly. And perhaps one of the more difficult things is that when we're triggered, we tend to trigger other people as well. So those are the 5 big mistakes that people make: thinking people who disagree with you are bad, telling others what to think, making others feel bad about themselves, arguing with reason and evidence, and talking while triggered. So what I'm curious about, though, is what about you guys? Of these 5 mistakes, which ones do you struggle with most? And again, you can use Mentimeter here and put them in, or you can put them into the chat.
While folks are responding to that, I want to read you a comment from Jill in the chat.
Yeah.
It was to which I think your last point, number 5. And she says, so that suggests that no one is open-minded. Oof.
Mm.
Is that correct, Jill? Did I characterize that you were responding to?
Yes, that is absolutely correct. No one is open-minded. We're all working from a place of pre-existing beliefs, and we tend to believe those, like defend those beliefs against new ideas. Now, does that mean no one can change their mind? Absolutely not. People change their minds all of the time, but it means that how we change our minds is different than we tend to think. It isn't this reasoned, rational process of examining evidence and coming to a conclusion. And if you're wondering why that is, like why human beings would have evolved to be like that, the reason is because we couldn't manage if we were changing our minds all the time, right? If every time we encountered a new argument or a new piece of evidence and tried to update our beliefs in response to that and rework our entire belief system, it would take up all of our time and energy and we wouldn't be able to survive. So this is actually a highly adaptive strategy. The second thing is, keep in mind, if our belief system as it is has kept us alive up to this moment, then we probably don't want to tinker with it too much, right? So we want to make sure that the new beliefs we bring on are really proven, like that we have a really good reason for updating our belief system.
So I wanted you to circle back and just draw a little terminology clarification.
Yeah.
In colloquial speak, when we say, and I think as Jill says, open-minded, we think of that as a kind of catch-all for someone who is willing to hear other ideas.
Yes.
And you're using it in a more precise, nuanced psychological way, I think.
Yeah. That is probably true. Although even in the colloquial sense, I would say we are not as open-minded as we would like to think, if that makes sense.
Right. The idea that you always have something in the back of your mind to some degree that is driving your opinion and biases, no matter how open-minded you
Right. And one of the things that's most I find really interesting is that the people who think of themselves as most open-minded, most reliant on science and evidence and facts, are actually the most prone to motivated reasoning. So the more educated you are, the more intelligent you are, actually the better you are at justifying your pre-existing beliefs and not changing, which is kind of interesting. So looking at this, so debating with reason and evidence, number one, that is super common. And telling others what to think, yep, right up there. Talking while triggered, yeah, that I think we all know that gets us. Making others feel bad about themselves and thinking people I disagree with are bad, not quite as popular, but still up there. What are you seeing in the chat, Locke?
How far? Brian says, I appreciate rational reasoning, reasonable thinking. Not focusing on reasoning is hard. Very much so.
Yeah.
Jill said she's appreciated, or she saw your explanation of open-minded. Marilyn says a lot comes down to values, which are deeply held. Very true.
Yeah.
And I apologize in advance. I'm going to massacre this name. Shasila. It's interesting that even if we don't say we don't like someone, they could probably pick it up anyway. That was a point I wanted to make about 4 and 5, because they kind of came in low, because we all think that we're not making people feel bad, and we don't think they're bad, but they may be picking up on things or getting impressions from us that we don't intend to send.
Yeah, that is a really important point, that when people hear that you disagree with them and that you disagree with them vehemently, they can take that very personally. So good to keep in mind, and we'll talk a little bit about what to do about that. Okay, thanks everybody for that feedback. So now we are going to talk about a better way to do this, because having better political conversations isn't just a matter of avoiding those mistakes, but there are actually positive things you can do to have more positive conversation. So first, I just want to give you a definition of kind of what smart politics is. First off, it's an advocacy method. So this isn't just a way to have political conversations that don't result in fights. We come from a place of, wanting to have influence on the people we talk with. Second, it is a person-to-person conversation-based method, which means we are all about getting out there and having a conversation with people who disagree with us, and sometimes who disagree with us vehemently. We think that is the best way to engage in democratic action. And finally, smart politics is psychologically informed. Everything I teach is based on psychological principles, and it's the reason smart politics works. So why are smart politics conversations different? We do several things. One is we avoid triggering defensiveness. So we don't make people feel bad about themselves. We don't make them feel like their group that they belong to is bad. We bypass the belief defense system. So we do that. We don't go head on with telling them that they're wrong or presenting arguments against their current beliefs. If anything, we simply encourage them to come up with arguments against their own beliefs themselves. We meet the other person's emotional needs. So it can be really, really hard to change your belief system, particularly for someone who has held a belief system for a really, really long time, grown up with it, and has a family that believes all the same things. So a lot of times what people need is a helping hand, basically, to make that transition from one belief system to another. And finally, we facilitate change by fostering greater rationality, curiosity, empathy, self-reflection, and here's that word, open-mindedness. Not perfect open-mindedness, mind you, but more open-mindedness. This is the change conversation pyramid. You might notice it looks like a little bit like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And it's our model for what a person needs in a conversation in order for that conversation to work and for that conversation to open them up to actually changing their mind. And I'm going to go through each of these levels. At the bottom is what people need most and first. You can't get to cognition until you've built the rest of the pyramid. And one of the most common mistakes, and I think our quiz earlier showed it, is going to cognition first. That's where you're presenting reason and evidence and ignoring all of these other steps. So the first thing we need to do in a conversation is to provide comfort. In other words, we need to make people feel safe enough to learn and grow. A lot of times people get immediately triggered when politics come up, and when that's happening, they can't think clearly. So you really need them in a place where they don't feel threatened. So how do we make them feel comfortable? First off, be respectful, no personal attacks, and really important is assuming good motives. They're going to say things you don't like and you think are wrong. It's important to assume that they're saying those things not because they are bad people, or because they want to do harm, but because they want to make the world a better place. They just have different ideas about how to do it than you do. It's important to say to them that you'll still love them no matter what, that you'll still like them no matter what. These kinds of reassurances can make someone who's really wary of sharing their views much more comfortable and open. Another thing that you can do up front is to set boundaries for the conversation. So if somebody is really afraid of having a dialogue, saying up front, you know, I know you're afraid to have this conversation. I'm a little scared about it too. Let's just agree that we're going to be respectful and not make any personal attacks. And if anybody feels uncomfortable, we'll just tap out and come back to it later. So saying those kinds of things up front can be very helpful. The second layer in the pyramid is connection. This is really about earning the other person's trust and forming an alliance. You can connect by making yourself vulnerable, so opening yourself up to attack, and that can be by being honest about something that they really disagree with you about, not in a way that says you should think like me too, but in a way that is kind of an admission. So if you're having a conversation with someone you know is really anti-abortion, just saying, well, you know, you may not agree with this, but I actually think people should have the right to abortion, can make yourself vulnerable to attack. And when you make yourself vulnerable to attack, they're much more likely to do the same thing. And that's how we build connection. You also need to show them that you can tolerate their differences. So when they say things that you find really extreme or bad, to, you know, take a breath and listen, and don't react negatively, withhold judgment on what they have to say. Even more important than all of that is highlighting ways you are alike and agree. And this is what really goes into forming an alliance. You are trying to reframe politics as, instead of a you versus me issue, you want it to be an us versus the problem discussion. So you're not fighting over which of you is right, which of you has the right solutions. Instead, you're two people who are examining the problems in the country and working together to find the best way to approach them. The third level in the pyramid is comprehension. And basically, this is all about learning the other person's point of view. And this is without worrying at all about sharing your own point of view. This is just figuring out what they think. And the best way to do this is by asking questions. Be really curious. Come at it not from a place of trying to elicit their arguments about things, but rather elicit their stories. What kinds of experiences have they had that have shaped their views about the political world? Learn about, you know, the kind of household they grew up in. Did, you know, were their parents Republicans? And what kinds of things did they learn about politics as a kid? As you listen to what they have to say, make sure you're listening to understand, not to refute or rebut what they're saying. And eventually you're going to reflect back what they say. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. The fourth level in the pyramid is compassion. So often we forget to show that we actually care about what others have to say about politics, particularly when we disagree with them. You know, it's important. We like to think of ourselves as very empathic, and yet when it comes to showing Republicans empathy, we tend to turn away. But showing compassion is a fundamental part of building a relationship with someone. And if you don't care about them, why should they listen to what you have to say? So this is a fundamental step in building that relationship in the conversation. How can you do that? Things like facial expressions, body language, the words you use, and the kinds of sounds and encouragers you use. These are things we do in all other types of conversations in our lives, but for some reason, when we get into these political conversations with people we disagree with, these things go by the wayside. So be sure you're finding things that you can express concern about in your dialogues. Whoops, did I double click? I must have double clicked.
Completely removed cognition.
And cognition is the final step in the pyramid. And basically what encouraging cognitive change comes down to is not making an argument, but gently encouraging people to rethink their point of view. There are a number of different ways to do that, but we encourage people most often to tell just a personal story about how you came to develop your views, or some experience you had, or something you saw on TV. When you put it in a narrative form, when you put it in terms of your experience, it is much more likely to influence what people think, because it doesn't trigger the belief defense system. It kind of eludes the defenses and becomes incorporated into their thinking.
I want to pause for a second and read a couple of questions. Some of these, I know some of these are going to sort of get bounced over into the next section with the site and probably address there. Jill asks, what if your family thinks it's funny to tease and treat you like you're just dumb or naive to do as you do? Ugh.
Yeah. So that comes down to setting boundaries, and setting boundaries around these conversations can be really important. If you are talking with people who are frankly abusive in dialogue, and that's kind of what you're talking about. So you have to confront that head on and tell them that you'd like to have a political conversation with them, that you're interested in hearing what they have to say, but there's some basic ground rules that everyone has to agree to, and that includes not mocking people for their beliefs, not calling them names, not questioning their motives or their intelligence. And as long as they're willing to stick to that, you're happy to have the conversation. Otherwise, you're not going to engage anymore. And you have to defend those boundaries. So if they cross those lines, you have to present some kind of consequence for that. That could be, you know what, I'm not going to talk politics with you anymore. It could be, I'm not going to come over to your house for dinner anymore if you are going to be abusive in that way. And it's important to separate that out from the kinds of smaller challenges people have in a conversation, and what really crosses over into abusive behavior when it's persistent disrespect.
Jean says, as a former elected, sorry if I mispronounced your name, as a former elected public official in the great state of New Jersey, I encourage my argumentative family members to get engaged in the political process. Oftentimes, one's sense of hopelessness recedes once they're aware of the access they have with the political process, i.e. county level political meetings, leadership studies, etc., how to get involved. And then also addressing Jill's point about being called naive or dumb. Passive aggressive behavior is mean no matter what the subject matter is, what Karen was kind of getting at, is not being with the family over the holidays an option. And I wanted to bring that up because avoiding the family over the holidays is an option, but I think it's one that you are here to address, to help with, I guess.
Yeah, no, for the most part, people can manage the kind of bad behavior around politics, and what I'm teaching here today will avoids 99% of the kinds of problems people encounter. But as with everything in human relations, sometimes things rise to the level of abuse, and once people run into abusive behavior, you've got to lay down a boundary. You've got to set that line, and when people cross it, you have to have consequences. You have to protect yourself from the abuse.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we want to delicately balance, and I don't want to step on anyone's toes here, is you're constantly in a balance on an individual basis between how much you should kind of lean into a little bit of the
Mm,
process and a little bit of, trying to take it on, and how much you want to protect yourself and say, you know what, this is not a good place or
yeah,
time for me. And that's going to be an
yeah.
individual call for everybody.
I think you're absolutely right about that. Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes some of us have privilege, like we can say, well, I don't, I can take it. I supplement my ego and let them call me dumb because I'm here to work with them. But for other people that may be very triggering, or it may come with layers of interpersonal relationships that are very different and don't, yeah.
Yeah. My guess is if often when there is that kind of abusive behavior around politics, it can also show up in other areas around other topics. So those can be often intertwined. But you're absolutely right. Some people are in a better position to tolerate it, and it might be worth it for a calculated intervention politically.
Yeah, and I next comment is from Marilyn. I want to hold that one for a second because it leads directly into the change conversation cycle. Might be better to, so Sheila says it might be better to set the boundaries with a family member in private so others don't take sides. Take them aside and talk to them privately instead of making the centerpiece. And then Marilyn, just kind of echoing what we're saying, avoiding family or avoiding particular conversations is appropriate care for self and self-compassion in instances. I'm sorry, I apologize. I'm reading some of these without having looked at them first, which is always a dangerous for when you're reading off of prompter. Marianne says, my situation is a little different. My adult son was brought up in a progressive democratic family, enthusiastically participating in volunteer causes. I'm sorry, I'm really rushing here. Volunteering for progressive causes, has become extremely right-wing in his beliefs and is very outspoken and obnoxious when he talks about it. He's joined the Marines and is now a police officer, and his father, brother, and I now believe that police and military training must be steeped in white supremacy. As his mother, this is horrifying to me, and nothing we say, no matter how much we use a smart politics approach, makes any difference. He escalates and gets and any get-together becomes miserable. It's very sad and a real loss for our family, and one that can't be reached. I would say definitely, Marianne, let's bring that one back up maybe in the after party when you have a little bit of time to address personal situations. Marilyn says, I've been at family gatherings and walked away from conversations. Depends on where you are with your own inner work. Absolutely true. And Janet says, I found that asking them a personal question about another topic is helpful. I think that might dovetail into getting into the conversation change cycle.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and actually look at the tool we use to have these conversations so we can climb this pyramid. So the change conversation cycle. It is a 5-step process for having a dialogue that really makes sure that you hit all of those levels. And we're just going to quickly run through each of these steps. So the first step is to ask a question. Now, the asking step is what we do usually if we're initiating a conversation. And so if we're coming into a situation and we'd like to start a dialogue with someone, we open up the dialogue with a very broad, open-ended question that is curious about their thoughts and perspective. So an example of something like this might be, how are you feeling about the results of the 22 midterm? Which would be very wide open. Another wide open thing, if you want to go to a specific topic, how did you feel about the Supreme Court ruling that overturned Roe v. Wade, and has that changed your thinking about anything? So throwing the doors open, not offering, not coming in from a place that is highly judgmental, but a place of curiosity, that can start a dialogue. Now, more often, what I find is that people begin a conversation at the listen step, because often we aren't the ones who are bringing up the topic, but someone else says something. And a lot of times, so that something they say is really triggering. So what do you do then? The first step is to really listen to what they have to say. And as part of that, you can ask follow-up questions to kind of get them to expand upon it. But the really important thing with listening is to make sure you understand what their point of view is. Again, you're not listening to refute or to rebut or to reply to what they are saying, but simply to get the gist of their perspective.
I'm going to follow up just for a second, if you want to go back to listen for just a second. One of the things about them starting, I've noticed in my experience, sometimes dinners or whatever, they'll kind of just drop a hot potato. They don't really make a statement about their beliefs. They just say, oh, there go the liberals, blah, 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 this or that again. And they're kind of fishing a little bit to kind of get you to take the bait, but they're not really stating a stance. You have to press them a little bit and say, oh, well, what do you think about that? I wanted to also go back to one of Marilyn's comments, because it gets to this listen thing we've talked about a lot this year. I want to understand, but often there's no rational explanation offered that leads to understanding, just talking points, usually from Fox News. That kind of gets at what we call the fire hose effect is. You suddenly get 20 minutes of everything Tucker Carlson said in the past year.
Right. That's very common. And this is the reality of how human beings form and defend their political beliefs. So the important thing to remember is beliefs come first, reasons come second. And the reasons are really rationalizations for the beliefs that already exist. So before I was talking about how people are kind of assigned a political party at birth, the same way they're assigned a religion. Well, along with that political party comes a set of beliefs, that may actually change over time, depending on what the political party's positions are. So what that means is when you want people to defend their political party, which has existed from birth, they're going to give you reasons, or really rationales, that are drawn from whatever they have heard most recently, whatever is at the forefront of their mind. And if what they have heard most recently has come from watching Fox News or reading Breitbart, that's what you're going to hear. And it won't do you any good to refute any of those things, because those things have nothing to do with why they are a Republican. They are a Republican because they were born into a Republican household, most likely, or had some really important political socializing event that happened to them that got them to switch parties.
Sorry, go ahead.
So what listening is really about is just making the other person feel heard. And it doesn't matter that it's all messy and doesn't make a whole lot of sense. What you're really looking for is kind of that thing they're talking about that seems emotionally centric for them. What is the thing that has them really angry or really scared or really agitated in this particular moment? And that's the thing that you want to, and then the next step, reflect back.
Yeah, and I am making a point of trying not to use football and boxing metaphors or military metaphors with you. So I'm working on a whole new branch of dog metaphors. And it's
Go
like
for it.
when your dog just has too much energy and they just have to run it out.
Yeah.
And you just have to, it takes a lot of patience and a lot of time. I've switched over to conversations now, not dogs, to say, okay, here come all the Fox News talking points. I'm going to let you get them all off my chest. I'm going to let the dog run around the living room for 10 minutes until.
Yeah, and one of the ways that I think about it is back with reference to the belief defense system. They basically are throwing all their ammo at you out front. Like they have the sense that at some level you're going to challenge their belief defense system or their beliefs, and so they're just taking all of their ammunition and throwing it at you, and eventually they're going to run out. But I like the tiring out too, because that kind of captures also what happens to them emotionally. They start up here, and then the more they talk, the more they kind of come down. So in the reflect step, you basically tell the person what they told you. And it can be difficult, like because of what Marilyn was saying, it can be a whole lot. But don't worry about reflecting everything they said back to you. Chances are they won't remember everything they said to you either. You're really going for what are the most important things you heard, and you're making your best guess. If you get it wrong, it's okay, because the next thing you say is that right? And then they have an opportunity to say, actually, no, what I really meant was this. And sometimes when they say that, they're correcting themselves, not you, but it does two important things. One is it checks your understanding, right? It helps you to really get where they're coming from. But it makes them feel like you are really listening. It shows them that you are really listening. And most people, when they share their political views, feel like nobody is listening to anything they have to say. So once someone feels heard, they will calm down a lot and get to a place where they're more open to hearing your perspective. And that's what we really want. The fourth step in the cycle is to agree. And I can feel all of you cringing and saying, no, I can't possibly agree. The good news is you don't have to agree with everything they said. All you have to do is find some things that they said that you can agree with. In general, what I find is that it's easiest to agree on values and goals and emotions. It's hardest to agree on policies and politicians and parties and facts. Facts can be really hard to agree on. So stay away from those. Focus on the values and goals and emotions. And once you've agreed, it is finally your chance to share something about your own perspective. Again, you're not going to come at them with a well-reasoned argument supported by a bunch of data. Instead, we want you to share a story that has to do with your experience having to do with this topic. And that is going to make you a lot more persuasive than you would be otherwise. What we found is that when people share in the form of a story, that other people remember the facts they share more, that are woven into that story, that they have a stronger empathic response to the information than they do with just facts alone. And it helps them see things from your perspective. They have to do perspective taking in order to process the story. So all of those things bypass the belief defense system and help them take in a new way of seeing things.
I want to clarify, I know in the past people have gotten confused by the use of the term story. They think, well, I don't have a personal story about. So a story is not necessarily, it doesn't have to be this thing happened to me. It can be, I had an opinion about this. I used to have an opinion about this and it changed, or I saw this issue differently over time.
Mm-hmm.
So the story doesn't have to be, I was walking down the street and, you know, the story can be, when I was younger, I thought this, and then things changed for me and I think this now.
Right, right. The important thing is that you are not presenting an argument, but instead are presenting something about your own inner process or your own experience that it informs the discussion in some way. Yeah. Okay, so let's go ahead and do questions about the change conversation cycle.
And while you folks are pulling those together, I just want to say, those of you who have been commenting, I think what we'll probably do is we'll probably try to get through a little bit of this. Maybe you want to do a demo, Karin, and then I can't remember.
Yeah, we're gonna do we're gonna do a demo after this.
Okay, so if you feel, I'm not ignoring your questions in the chat or the topics you're raising, but I think let's get through the demo, and then we'll circle back and kind of get into the nitty gritty and about some of these specific examples and specific questions. But right now, do you have questions about those 5 steps? Because they can be confusing. They're not confusing, but
Yeah.
people sometimes aren't sure about the agree part or the sharing part. I think you can enter. Whoops. Okay. You can enter those into the Mentimeter, or you can enter them in the chat. One thing I'll say too, going back to the fire hose and the Fox News stuff, if you want to pull, I don't know if you want to pull up the change conversation cycle. I don't know how easy that is.
Let's see.
You don't have to.
I think I have it here.
There it is. Those first 3, ask, listen, reflect. You can spend a lot of time just churning, good time, purposefully churning through those. It's not a failure, or you're not doing it wrong if you find yourself going back over and perhaps throughout the entire conversation. You're not going to, this may be a series of conversations you have with someone over several months. And in the first one, you may just spend it on ask, listen, and reflect.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I find amazing, is how much time it takes. Like this doesn't happen overnight. This doesn't happen in a 15-minute conversation. At least I've never done it. I don't think I'll ever do that. But it's remarkable how much time and going back to the same conversation again and again it takes. But I do think it bears fruit in the end.
Yeah, I think it definitely depends on the person you're talking with. Like I think there are people who it can be a lot easier to move through the cycle with in a short conversation, and then there are others that, yeah, it takes a lot longer. And I think it also depends on the particular topic.
Yeah, and I know from personal experience on my own side that I often will be defensive about something in a conversation, and then hours, days, weeks later, it sinks in, and I think about it and I address it within myself. So you can be having influence in the conversation that's not showing up right there in face to face with you, but they might go off later and think about stuff, which leads to the point. I don't know if you're going to mention David Camp's 2 criteria for a successful conversation.
Yes, that's great. My friend David Camp, who is the creator of the White LA Toolkit workbook, he says that there are 2 ways to know whether a conversation was a success, or 2 things that have to happen. One is that the other person has to be willing to talk with you again. And the other is that you expressed yourself authentically at some point. As long as those 2 things happen, then the conversation was successful.
And the express yourself authentically just be as simple as saying, well, I'm a liberal and I believe in pro-choice. I know, you know, we disagree on that, but I just want you to know where I'm coming from. I'm not trying to fake you out or pretend to be something I'm not.
Right.
Circling back to what Luck said earlier, it's amazing how much I learn about myself. I almost learn more about myself than I do about someone else, taking the time to reflect about the conversations. And sometimes it takes months for me to, oh shoot, you know what, this is something I could have said then, or asked or listened instead of talking. Yeah, you learn so much about yourself that you didn't know prior, and that's what I love about this technique.
Yeah, that is very true.
I'm really thinking about that fire hose thing, and about, you know, how people need to, it's like a defense mechanism. And I never thought of it like that before. And I don't think I could sit through them spewing everything, but I think I could authentically say, hey, I really want to listen, but can you slow it down and just, you know, give me 1 point at a time so I can think about it. And if you reflect back to them sooner, they may calm down sooner, and you wouldn't have to hear the fire hose. So I think I've got a new tool to use. So thank you.
Yeah.
While we have you on microphone,
absolutely
though,
great.
I apologize. Can you pronounce your first name for us?
It's Sue Sheila.
Sue Sheila.
Very simple.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's what you were saying earlier when you said it sounds like Sue and Sheila. I thought that was someone making a reference to like 2 people I wasn't aware of or something. Thank you. Okay, got it. Sue Sheila. Thank you very
No
much.
problem.
Thanks. All right. Well, should we do a demonstration? Yeah. I'm looking for somebody who's willing to channel a a family member, a loved one, someone who is you find difficult to talk with, and I will do my best to talk with you.
Is there anyone who, oh, there's Janet. Yeah. And I know Marilyn, I think you were volunteering about the actress part, so we can do several demos. Happy to do several demos. I speak for Karen. She's the one that has to do
No, it's great. We have time. So
Janet raised her hand, I thought. Were you raising your hand to be in the demo, Janet?
I will.
Okay.
awesome. Hi, Janet.
I like to do this with, hi.
And Janet, for everybody else, you're coming to us from?
The Missouri Ozarks.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, it's great to see you. So I'm going to let you just, do you want to tell us who you're channeling? Is it someone in particular?
A friend who is worried about transgender people.
Oh, perfect. This is a good one. All right. I'll go ahead and start off the conversation. Is that okay? All right.
That's great.
Okay. Hi, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good today.
Yeah.
There's a lot of bad news. There's a lot of bad news about on the news about those people being killed in Colorado.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. It seems like there's a shooting every other day nowadays. It breaks my heart. How are you, what are you thinking?
Well, I'm having trouble because I think, there's a lot of people that have trouble fitting into society. And I think transgender people and gay people, that liberals are only concerned about them. They're not thinking about white people or, people with families and kids that they want to protect from these kinds of outside influences. And I just feel like I'm having problems with it.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of people who have for whom these changes are kind of shocking. So what I'm hearing from you is that you kind of think there's some unfairness there, that it's not just that there have been changes, but maybe that some other people are being left behind. Am I hearing you right?
Well, I'm really concerned that transgender people and gay people are getting respect and compassion, when I'm worried that they might be influencing my children. I don't want them around my children. I'm afraid of that change. I'm afraid of that change, that things are changing, and I'm worried about my own children.
So maybe what you're saying is that this wouldn't bother you so much, except you feel like your kids are in danger as a result of some of the changes in society.
Yeah, it's that woke culture. It's that woke culture. And, I don't know how, I'm worried about what they read, what's in the libraries. What if there is a transgender on my child's ball team? I don't want them in the same locker room.
Well, it sounds like you have a lot of concerns. What is it mostly that you think your kids are going to get hurt in some way? Or are you thinking that your kids are just going to be kind of left behind?
I'm more afraid that they're going to be influenced by something I don't believe in.
Yeah. What do you fear might happen?
Well, I fear that they will learn things that will make it difficult, that they'll be viewed as gay or transgender if they are around people like that, and that will affect their ability to succeed and to get along in our family. It's not our family's values.
I see. Yeah. So is it more that are you afraid that if they're around gay people and transgender people, that they might decide that they're gay or transgender too?
I do worry about that.
Yeah.
And I don't want my children to face that kind of trouble and discrimination.
Yeah. Because you see how people who are gay and transgender are judged in our society, and you want your kids protected from that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I do.
Yeah. Well, I certainly can can see where you're coming from about, like, I'm a parent. I have 3 kids. Mine are pretty old now. They're all in college. But you know, it would break my heart if I felt like any of them were being discriminated against on the basis of their sexuality or their gender, or, you know, anything like that. Like that is, whenever society changes and changes as fast as our society changes, like it can mean that people get hurt in some ways. And you know, it makes perfect sense that you would be looking out for your kids' well-being at this moment. Absolutely. And I have my sister-in-law's child is non-binary, and formerly he, now non-binary, they, is having a lot of trouble at school. And it's one of those things that's really interesting, because we all knew when they were born that they were different. You know, they were assigned male at birth, but never wanted to have anything to do with male things. It just didn't. They always wore dresses and makeup and nail polish, and it made them so happy, you know. So we were happy to go along with that, and it's just been very sad to reach this point now in school, and they're exposed to other kids who do say hurtful things and aren't that accepting. So that's been a difficult transition, I think, for all of us.
Well, I wouldn't want, I hate to see other people hurt too.
Yeah.
I'm worried about my children being hurt,
Yeah.
but I hate to see others being hurt too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, you know, that is something, no matter where we are on the political spectrum, this is one of those things where we can all agree on. You know, we all love our kids, right? And we want them to be happy and healthy, and free of, you know, being mistreated. So yeah, it's been really good talking with you about this. I know this isn't always an easy topic to discuss.
Well, thank you for listening.
Yeah.
I'm feeling a little better right now.
Good. Well, hopefully we can talk more in the future.
Thank you.
Okay, time. Yay. Thank you, Janet. That was great. You're fabulous. So everybody, I'm gonna actually stop the screen, or at least, yeah, I'm gonna stop it. Stop the screen share. Oh, look, I can see all your beautiful faces now. Up until now, it's been like me in a black hole. So reactions to that conversation. And you can just unmute yourself and share.
Well, I thought you both did a great job. This is Eric from Oregon speaking. And I appreciate what both of you had to say. And I appreciated the civility and respect and the discourse and your common ground that you had. But Karin, I didn't hear you talking about your values and beliefs with regard to transgender issues at all. I heard you being very empathetic to her and finding the common ground. But I didn't see you going any further in terms of steps, in terms of expressing your own values about transgender people. So would you take it further than that, or is that as far as you would go?
Yeah, it depends. It depends on the conversation and how far I think the person can go in that dialogue. To me, all of those, the points about my positions on transgender were inherent to the story I told her. Basically, I told her a story from my own life about a relative who's non-binary. So and that's a person, and I told a story of how accepted he was they were in our family, and how they transitioned and how that's been. So the idea is that story contains all of the nuggets for shifting her narrative going forward. And so the power of this method is I never have to make any of it explicit, because as soon as I turn it into an explicit argument for changing her beliefs about transgender issues, her belief defense system becomes activated, and she starts coming up with all her reasons for why that's wrong.
I appreciate that very much, and I think that was very educational for me. And what I would call you is pastoral.
Awesome.
In a very positive sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Also, I had a kind of a devil's advocate question along the same lines, but I think I'll skip to the point, which is you could go further in a next conversation. You've built a little bit of trust. You started to build the bridge, or however you want to describe it. And so the next conversation, you're not going to pull out a whole book of facts, but you could go a little further into saying, well, because my devil's advocate question was going to be, well, Karin, you didn't change her mind. She's still, how is that a successful conversation, right?
Yeah. I suspect I did change her mind, although it not a conversion, right? But that's not what I'm going for. Often in these conversations, all I'm looking to do is to soften opposition, like get a person to a place. And this is the opening someone's mind part, right? I'm trying to get them to a place where they're starting to consider alternative perspectives, like they enter the realm of the possible rather than the realm of the insane, which is where we often start. Yeah, Janet.
I thought the way your personal story came about, it really did shift my thinking and make me realize that other children can be hurt. And I can see that would change someone. And I think the power of the personal story can't be downplayed at all.
Yeah, and it would have been so different if I'd said, well, you're so concerned about your children. What about the kids who are, right? Like that wouldn't have gone anywhere.
Do you want to do another demo? If Marilyn, would you still like to do a demo, or it's up to you? Or would anybody else? Anybody? We got plenty of time.
Yeah, it's up to you guys, because I did a couple with you guys before, and I understand the conservative viewpoint pretty well. At least I shouldn't say I understand it. I can imitate it. I don't understand a lot of it, but Yeah, it's up to you, because transgender is one thing that I'm not very good at. You know, I don't understand a lot of the concern about it. So I thought this last little demo was great. It informed me about what some of the concerns are, that people are so upset about this, all this transgender thing. And I just got in a conversation earlier today with people about the World Cup at Qatar and all this, you know, their hatred of gays and the penalizing of players if they show any affinity for gays. And, you know, so I'm not really into all that. I don't understand what's motivating all that. I guess other than, as you say, Karen, society is evolving and changing so quickly that some people can't keep up with it. Their psyches can't keep up with it. But yeah, I'm available if you want to do something. You know, I can play the role.
What topic do you want to do?
No, you call it, girl. No, that's why I didn't want to butt in, because if some people are going to get more benefit from actually channeling what someone in their family is like, I could do that. My older brother, I could do my older brother, but I'm not going to be with them this year. I'm not going to be with family. I haven't been with family since pre-pandemic, December 19. So, but I just had a conversation, as I said earlier today. We get a bunch of Canadians down here. I live in Mexico in the winter time because they're leaving their frozen tundra. And it is amazing that as much as I try to avoid Americans, there are extremely conservative Canadians, okay, who think Trudeau is some kind of authoritarian dictator because he made them wear masks during the pandemic. And, you know,
well, should we talk about that? So you want to channel somebody?
I'm just saying, yeah, I can
let's talk about mask wearing in the pandemic.
Yeah, because I'll give you another example is in the recent.
Well, let's just have the conversation.
Okay, in the recent election, they tossed the governor of Nevada, even though, what's her name? You know, even though the senator won re-election, they tossed the governor because they were so upset about the pandemic restrictions that were put on the state by the Democratic governor, and they went Republican. So we're still dealing with this anti-masking, anti-shutdown. Why should I give a shit about any other human being who might be vulnerable to COVID? I don't want to wear a mask. Okay. It is my freedom, and I want to work. And I should be able to work, and no government should interfere with my freedom in that way. Is that a good start?
That is a wonderful start. Thank you. Thank you. So what I'm hearing is that you're really angry. Like there is a lot of anger here at the government, and you feel like the government has completely intruded upon your personal rights and
freedom. What happened to America and freedom? Isn't it about individual freedom and individual rights? Why would we be forced to wear masks and can't go to work and can't go outdoors and can't? And in Canada, they couldn't go back. They had to take the more restrictive test. If they left the country, they had to take the PCR. We in the US only have to take the antigen. It's all gone now. But Canadians who came to Mexico and went back, they had to stay in a hotel and quarantine. They had to pay the cost. They had to pay the cost.
Wow. So one of the things you're angry about is, like, in addition to there being a violation of freedom, that it actually imposed expenses on people that, you know, who knew if they could pay for those. And it sounds like you thought, if the government's going to make those kinds of requirements for people to do that, then they should at least be subsidizing it.
Well, that's Canada. But just to give you another perspective, I live in Mexico. Guess what?
Mhm.
The Mexican government didn't have the money to give to people who were out of work due to pandemic and less tourism, et cetera, that
Mhm.
Canada and the US paid to every single citizen in their country. And yet the people of Mexico wore masks. Why? Because they give a shit. They care about other people. So now you're right. I've gotten out of my role of the anti-masker, but I want to tell you why this is all about culture. It's about culture. It's about, do you care about other people? Do you care about the fact that you might have it and be asymptomatic and you hurt somebody who's vulnerable, immunocompromised?
So
And in America and Canada, they're like, hey, I care about me. I care about me and my.
So one of the things we do in Smart Politics is when somebody says something we disagree with, is we don't assume negative intentions, right? We automatically come from a place of non-judgment. So I'm going to assume that in America, people who disagree with me about mask wearing and vaccinations and all of that
Care about other people. Care about other people.
that they do care about other people, that they do care about their family members, and that they are just making different decisions about how to weigh costs and benefits.
Or they believe different facts, right?
Or
About the
they may
science,
have a
about
different
whether or not
understanding of risk.
correct, whether or
Absolutely.
not COVID's actually deadly, whether or not.
Absolutely. So what I would, to go back to this conversation, what I would say is there are a lot of things in there that I definitely agree on. Like I found, I still find mask wearing to be incredibly uncomfortable. Like I hate it. I hate wearing masks. It's been like 2 years of like personal trauma, in part because I'm a little hard of hearing, and I'm not good about wearing my hearing aids. And so I often rely on people's lips to figure out what they're saying. You put a mask on somebody, not only are you muffling what they say, but I can't see their lips anymore. And it means I find it incredibly hard to actually interact with people. And, you know, there have definitely been times when I've wondered whether we're going overboard with the whole mask thing. You know, I'm a doctor, right? So I have, in my medical training, we obviously wore masks in surgery because we believe they are important in preventing the transmission of infection. And so this is, you know, this is something that from that perspective is like pretty natural for me. But yeah, I still wonder sometimes whether the whole mask thing was overblown, and particularly where I think I developed like the biggest question mark had to do with not giving people a choice about wearing masks or getting a rapid test. Like it seems to me if somebody took a rapid test and like on that day and they want to go somewhere, like if they can present those results, then not wearing a mask might be okay.
Well, just thank you for agreeing with me, because it was horrendous.
Yeah,
It was a
yeah.
horrendous imposition on our individual freedom. And we're living in supposedly a democracy that cares about people's individual civil rights, and to force people to either get tested or to show a Vax card, or to wear a mask to go to a restaurant in New York City? How ridiculous. All of those people, those politicians should have been thrown out of office. It's just
Yeah,
ridiculous.
I mean, I think as you know, all of us want to be free to do what we want, right? We don't want a government that is controlling like every little bit of our lives, and we want a choice. Of course, I want to keep my family safe, and you want to keep your family safe.
Right.
But sometimes
that's
it
what we
feels
care
like the
correct?
government is getting in, like doing things that kind of get in the way.
Isn't
Right?
that what's most important? What I want and what my family needs and wants. The
Yeah.
rest of society is not my business.
Hmm.
What my business is what I want to live my life. I want my freedoms. That's why I live in America. And I want my family protected. Now, my neighbor down the street or some libtard that lives across town, I could care less, correct? Why should I care about those people? Why should I care about them?
Yeah. Well, I hear you. I think it's natural to care more about your own family than other people. And in my personal circumstance, like our situation in our family is that my mom is immunocompromised, right? So we've, as a family, have had to work really hard to protect her. Like we've all gotten vaccinated, and we use a lot of rapid tests. Like before I see her, I take a rapid test, and other people do that. But it is scary, like when we go out to like a restaurant or somewhere. And for the most part, for 2 years, she just totally stayed inside. Like she couldn't go anywhere because she was so scared, even though she'd been vaccinated, even though she was wearing a mask. But kind of finally, she's slowly venturing out. And I guess I do worry from that perspective. Like, yeah, it doesn't, like, I worry about whether other people around us might expose her. And, you know, I get pulled in multiple directions. Like, do I want to go around telling my neighbors what they should do and asking everybody at the restaurant whether they have gotten vaccinated and telling them to wear masks? No, obviously not.
Listen,
But I also hope that she doesn't get COVID. So it's a hard thing.
I hear what you're saying, because of course you care about a mother or a grandmother or someone in your family, but maybe those people should stay home. Why should a handful of immunocompromised people restrict the freedom of the rest of the country? Think about that.
Yeah.
Think about that.
I mean, I think what you're getting at there, Marilyn, it's kind of like a fundamental question about the nature of government, right? Like, we are all these people who have come together as a society, and we're trying to create a society that protects all of our rights and all of our interests. And sometimes, you know, there's a trade-off between like our freedom and society's well-being. Like, let's say there was a disease that like wasn't like COVID that has such a low death rate, but something where it was a really high death rate. You know, like what if
HIV? Just don't be gay, for Christ's sake. You know, I mean, like HIV, they were killing themselves off.
No, but I mean something like something that has like a 90% death rate. Like at that point, you know, and if it was if it was spread in the same way as COVID, would we react differently? Like we, you know, sometimes we have to make those calls as a society, and I hear you. It's like a really hard decision.
Come on, you know, if people live a good life and eat well and take care of themselves, their immune systems will protect them. Not to mention God. We have God, and God will protect us if we are meant to live longer. So all this stuff about, you know, oh, okay, sometimes we have to restrict people from working and they have to put masks on and all this stuff. Let people decide for themselves. If they believe in God, if they believe God will protect them, if they believe they have a healthy immune system. Do you see where I'm going, Karen? It's all about me.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's great. You've done a wonderful job. And and if we were to continue this conversation, and if it were real, I would basically continue reflecting until you were totally down here. Like right now, you're still kind of at like a 9 on the 10-point scale.
Look for the common ground. Yeah, you're always looking for the common ground, but they'll always come back with individual.
It's because you're still too agitated. So if this were a real conversation, I would have spent a lot more time in the listen and reflecting. And every time you went back up, like re-escalated, I would go back until you like were totally down. Because that's the thing. You aren't ready to form an alliance until you're out of that fight or flight. You're like totally in fight. So you can't.
But that's what I love about your meme. But the arrows go both ways. The arrows don't just go one way. Sometimes you have to flip back.
Yeah, it's true.
Okay. Excellent. I don't want to drag it out.
Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you so much.
I can play those right-wing nut jobs.
Yeah, I'll bring you in the future.
Marilyn is so good that there were times when even I was like, wait, is she really believe this? So we should have kind of prepped people ahead of time, because both Marilyn and Janet were so good that if you could find yourself getting triggered by the characters they were playing and forget that they're playing a character and start to think, well, wait, does Janet really believe that? Does Marilyn really believe that? So good job, both of you.
I meet so many of them, I can act like them. So.
You've absorbed them. I apologize if I say your name wrong. Is it Rhea? Rhea Jean has a hand up.
Yeah. Oh, there. Yeah. Oh, we can't hear you. You unmuted, but we can't hear you.
Yeah, maybe your volume is down on the Zoom audio controls.
Huh. Okay.
Does she have earphones in? Sometimes that affects. I don't know. It doesn't look like it.
She's going to grab a mic.
While she's doing that, I just want to say that we do have time. I do want to circle back to some of the comments. Marianne, I'll leave it up to you, Marianne, if you want us to address your situation. I thought it was a very powerful and relevant situation with family members who change. And there's some other comments in here, some of them just kind of playing off what we've been talking about. But I do want to give everyone time if they have something they want to share or questions. Should we wait for Rhea Jean to come? She's going to get her mic.
Yeah.
Let me roll back just to the most recent ones. Some of these are Rhea Jean. Well, while we got Marilyn still here, Marilyn had said about a half hour ago or 20 minutes ago, Marilyn said, I realized my biggest downfall in inadequacy is patience. I have none with viewpoints I find offensive. And that's something we didn't get into too much about tonight, about the emotional triggering on your part, you as the smart politics speaker, and how to do
No,
it.
Karen does such a great job of it. I'm glad you noticed that. I was going to repeat it. The patience she takes with letting somebody vent and go off on their tangents or whatever. And she's clearly listening, because when she comes back with her reflection, she's heard what they've said and she puts it in a different tone and everything else, and then maybe shares a story, etc. But I don't have the patience. I might do it like a little bit, and then finally I go, I can't deal with this anymore. I can't deal with this anymore. It's the biggest problem for me, patience. Excellent examples, Karen.
Don't tell her that, because she'll start sending you all kinds of Buddhist reading material.
It does, Marilyn, the good news is that patience can be acquired with practice. And you've probably heard me talk about this before, but I basically used to get really badly triggered by Donald Trump, the Republican Party, things that people said. And I made a very conscious effort to expose myself to those things until I stopped getting triggered by them. So I basically did exposure therapy on myself, where I would sit and look at a picture of Donald Trump until my blood pressure came down. And I would listen to him give a speech and force myself to listen to it all the way through.
And thank you for pointing this out, because referring back to one of my other comments was, I too have been doing the inner work, but when I get together with family, it's a reflection back to me about how successful I've been with my inner work if I continue to get triggered. And that's when I said, I sometimes have got up and walked away from the conversation, because I'm not yet together enough internally. I don't have it all together yet to be able to handle that trigger. So thank you.
Yeah, but that not yet is really critical, because it's a journey.
Still working.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh.
You want to go, Janet? Or
I just wanted to share a success story with Dr. Karin.
All right. I love those.
Yeah, I've been practicing the change conversation cycle with a neighbor who 2 years ago called me a baby killer slut, and he's 10 years, he's in his 80s, and someone I really respected, and I hated for him to think of me that way, but we just kept talking, and he seemed really resistant, but I kept just reflecting back and telling him personal stories, agreeing with him. I'm really against killing babies too. I'm really worried about that, but I know too many friends who've had to make that choice. And, I think there's a better way than making it illegal. Those kinds of conversations I would have with him. And 2 days ago, we were talking, and he broke down and cried and told me, I am ashamed. I'm ashamed of my behavior. And I said, I was crying too. But I can't tell you how much that meant to me. To finally have someone that I've been talking to for 2 years, all of a sudden, just we made up, and now he's helping me organize a community event. He's going to play Santa Claus, and we're back on good terms. And actually, the thing that brought it to a head was, I asked him if he would be our Santa Claus. He always has been for years. And he said, no, I think I'm too sick this year. And then he posted all over Facebook that I was trying to take over the event, my liberal views, and I was just gonna take over the event. And I went running to his house and I said, you know, come on, Santa. I'm done with politics. That's what I told him. I'm done with politics. I'm tired of not being able to talk to you. And all of a sudden the dam broke. So thank you, Dr. Karin.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you for your hard work.
I want to, well, let's go ahead and take Josh. I'm popping kind of in and out right now, but I want to circle back after Josh Quinn's question up to getting, this kind of gets to Marianne's story earlier in the chat about loss of personal relationships or family relationships and the pain and trauma of it's not just the crazy uncle who makes you mad at Thanksgiving, it's the
Right.
loss of a friend or family. But I'll let you go ahead and take Josh Quinn's question.
Yeah, Josh Quinn?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, hi.
Hello. Oh, I guess this is question time, I guess. I was just curious about, I know you mentioned earlier about how, okay, I know you mentioned how engaging in politics during family time is bad, but so at the same time be problematic if you don't engage in politics either with your family.
So I think what I probably said was that fighting is the worst, right? Because it can be counterproductive. It can actually damage your relationship and push people away. But avoiding is still problematic. So what we really want is for you to engage in a healthy and productive way, and a way that allows you to advocate for your beliefs without damaging your relationship.
Oh, so it's bad because I'm not expressing myself in a sense.
Well, yeah, just avoiding. Usually that means that when we avoid political discussions with people we disagree with, it means that our relationships are more distant and we're not having the political impact we want to have. So it's really two things. When we get better at having these conversations, our relationships actually improve. Like, we get closer to people when we take these kinds of risks and have successful conversations despite our differences. And it's synergistic. As our relationships get better, we become more influential politically. People are more likely to listen to what we have to say.
I see. Okay. That makes sense. All right, thank you.
Yeah.
And happy Thanksgiving.
You too.
Thank you. Also want to follow up on what they said, that the extreme form of avoidance, of course, is banning or ostracizing or shunning someone, pushing someone out of your life. And that can have problematic consequences, bad consequences, because as you were pointing out when you were talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if they feel they aren't getting support, emotional support from their family, their liberal or progressive friends, they will find it probably someplace
else. And a lot of times,
yeah,
you know, that means driving them deeper into people on the right.
Right.
I did find it interesting that they're evaluating that hierarchy, by the way.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's a. Oh, go ahead.
I was just saying
Go
that
ahead.
there's a shocking statement that Karin made earlier where she said people would be willing to give up personal safety and basic needs for acceptance and, you know, the higher part of the hierarchy, the more emotional part of the hierarchy.
People generally prefer real death to social death, is kind of how we.
Dr. Karin?
I'm so tempted to get into another scenario, but I don't, Karen, like, do you have these often, or is this just like,
I used to have them really regularly, and I've been taking a break while I'm writing my book. You know, probably one in the new year is what I would expect. Early, like January, February. Does that sound right, Luck?
Yes, and we should probably, while the group has gotten fairly small here, and at least 2 of you are regulars, do we want to mention Sunday night group?
We do have a Sunday night group where people come to practice. So that is, I'm not always there. I'm lately,
That's true.
but group members have gotten really good, I think, at kind of doing the work on their own and giving each other feedback. So if you're looking to watch some of these or practice some of these, and also just get support for doing these conversations, because they're hard, and you know, it can help to troubleshoot some of the hurdles, whether they be emotional or practical. It's a great place to do it.